Hello, I'm Jennifer Keller from the Westport Library, and I'm excited to share two authors who published critically acclaimed debut novels in 2020, Maisy and Kimiko Guthrie. Maisy is a writer and public librarian. She earned an MFA from Brooklyn College, an MLIS from Rutgers University, and a BA from Wesleyan University. Her novel, These Ghosts Are Family, was a New York Times Book Review editor's choice and was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's first novel prize. Her writings have appeared in the Paris Review, School Library Journal, Lit Hub, and other publications. Kimiko Guthrie teaches dance and theater at CSU East Bay and is the co-artistic director of Dandelion Dance Theater. She holds a BA in creative writing from UC Santa Cruz and an MFA in choreography from Mills College. Block 17 was inspired by her experience growing up with a mother who was imprisoned as a child at the Rower incarceration camp during World War II. Our moderators today are Westport Library supporters Bernicestine, McLeod, Bailey, and Judith Hamer. Bernicestine is a trustee emerita of Brown University and has served on numerous boards throughout Fairfield County, including the Westport Library and Fairfield County's Community Foundation. She is a founding member of Team Westport and serves as its secretary. Currently, she is the chair of the board of the Mary and Eliza Freeman Center for History and Community, president of McLeod Associates, and vice president of Aisha & Co., a family-owned toy company. Judith Hamer has taught at the City College of New York, Columbia University, and New York University, and served as a director of training at Payne Weber and learning officer at the Rockefeller Foundation. Judith earned a BA from Cornell University, an MAT from Smith College, and a PhD from Columbia. She and her husband collaborated on an anthology, Centers of the Self, short stories by Black American women from the 19th century to the present. And she is currently working on a memoir. So we're looking forward to that as well. So without further ado, I am just going to let these four have a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer. Welcome to both of you. We are really excited to be able to spend this time with you. We've been looking forward to it for a while. And I know, Maisy, you were supposed to come see us in person back in March, just before, or I think just after. I think you were supposed March 17th, and the town of Westport closed down, I think March 11th or something like that. So we're delighted to have you with us now, and it's great to have you as well, Kimiko.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So
and I think it's really interesting to talk to both of you about your books, which both have to do with family from really different perspectives. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I must say that I've been thinking about each one of them since I read them. And I don't always do that with books. Sometimes it's just read it once and it's over.
Yes. Yeah, the interweaving of history with the present and tradition and legend and current day living in both books, even though they're different, I find that as kind of a common theme. So let me start with Kimiko. Can you comment? I know Jennifer briefly said that you were inspired by your family story, but can you elaborate a little bit on that and give us an idea of the process?
Sure. Oh, me okay? Feel a little echoey. Yeah, so as Jennifer mentioned in my bio, my mom was a young child when her family was incarcerated at the Rower internment camp. So growing up, it was kind of always this story that I'd hear fragments about. But strangely, my family, and I think many people in the Japanese American community at that time in the 70s and 80s, would talk about it almost as this pleasant memory. So it's very confusing to me. They called it camp. And so, as a kid, I thought, oh, my family got to attend some summer camp in the woods. And then I think it was about high school when I started learning the history, not so much in school, unfortunately, but putting it together that it was a prison. But my family even then was like, oh no, it wasn't a prison. Well, what wasn't there barbed wire? Weren't there men with guns? Well, yes, weren't you forced to go there? Well, yes, so there were these kind of two camps in my mind, the camp that they talked about, and then the more historical version that I knew about. So I guess this novel for me was trying to reconcile that kind of those fragments, putting them together. And I wanted to tell it from my present day perspective rather than to try to somehow embody accurately what happened then, but more depict kind of the confusion that goes on when you've kind of inherited certain energies without necessarily knowing what they are due to various aspects of oppression and denial that are kind of necessary survival coping mechanisms for those people who endured the experience. I wanted to write it from, the experience of the next generation.
Right. And what about you, Maisy? How did you come to write this?
It really developed over a long period of time. I attended the Brooklyn College MFA program in 2006, and I was writing. I started off by writing short stories that were kind of based on memory, but before I entered that program, when I was at Wesleyan, actually, I took a creative nonfiction course with the professor Elizabeth Bobrick, and one of the assignments she gave us was to write about a story that happened before you were born. So I had started writing this kind of little, I guess you can call it an essay, but it's, I obviously wasn't there, but about how my father was a police officer in Jamaica before we immigrated. And it's something, that he's actually never told me. I always hear the story through my mother. And the story is kind of, he was a police officer and then he was in kind of a terrible accident and his partner was killed. And that was kind of the driving force for him to immigrate to America. So I kind of put that story away. And, when I was in the MFA program, I kind of resurrected it. And then I also was writing stories. I wrote another story, which is called Gratitude. It's chapter 2 in the book, which was kind of inspired by my memories of going back to Jamaica for my grandmother's funeral when I was younger. So I think at some point after I graduated or finished the program, I started to think about how, even though the stories are very fictional, they are based on memory. They are based on like a shred of truth. And I think I was thinking about like my own real family and kind of how much we've changed in the process of immigrating to America and living here as long as we have. And I think one thing that I realized was I think, in Jamaica, everybody was close and part of that was out of necessity. And I think coming to America kind of opened up a lot of wounds. I think people didn't need to stay close for survival anymore. So people, in a way, I don't know, immigration was kind of a catalyst for people to confront a lot of trauma that happened back then. And I didn't realize that, those kind of feelings were present when I was a little kid. I was like, I love my cousins, I love my aunts, I love my uncles, I love my grandpa, but I didn't realize that there was all this kind of tension and hard feelings. And so I think over time, I just saw like my mother's side of the family kind of drift apart, both geographically and emotionally. So I think, I wrote this book as a kind of a way to process, how that happened just by, I guess, working with this kind of fictional family whose lives are, running in parallel to my own.
Yes, I think as a lot of times as people of color, we don't see ourselves in the history. So it's important for us to try in any way we can to recreate the history, but find out as much as we can about it. And I think that goes for all of us. So so I looked at it from that point of view, that this is something, even, the historical stories are probably not seen as much in American history than they should be. And I think we're getting to the point where it may be that they show up more, but it's important for us as people of color to be able to, tell the story so others can hear it and know about it. So that's what I picked up out of it.
Yeah, I was really, I've never read a work about the Japanese internment camps. And I remember being shocked and appalled when I found out about them. And this was when I was 30. I was doing some editing. And I thought, well, how come none of my history classes in any of those schools I went to ever said anything about this? And the more I found out about it, the more just annoyed at my own ignorance, and appalled that the country could do something like this. But of course, that was before I knew the emerging narrative of what slavery was really like. Because if I'd known that, then I wouldn't have been so appalled at the internment camps.
Right. I think, yeah, so much, as Bernicestine, as you were saying, so much of the history books, we have like a paragraph here, a paragraph there, of what should really be, kind of the main bulk of the history books. But yeah, I met a friend when I was in my 20s who had grown up right near Rower, Arkansas, and had never heard anything about it at all. Yeah, it's, I think kids are starting to learn about it in school a little bit more. But, obviously, in 2016, when I started writing this book in 2012, so it took me quite a while. And then, so a lot of the issues that I was writing about, when I would mention them to people, they almost seemed like they weren't so relevant. And even though I thought they were, but as 2016 happened, and then we heard people within the Trump administration actually referencing, the Japanese American internment as kind of almost like a template for, future, they were kind of justifying the potential Muslim ban. It was, just kind of shocking to hear something that I had thought was kind of this, skeleton that I was bringing out of the closet. To hear that as a contemporary dialogue again was really frightening.
And Maisy, you have a treatment of colorization and colonization and slavery. It takes up a good part of the book, but it paints the story of ancestors that we would not know about. And I know there's a loose connection between the ancestors that are white and the ancestors that are not white. But I shouldn't say that. I should say the descendants that are not white. But that was, I thought you treated that really well. And I think you kind of said that they're different sections, but you kind of pull them together and see how people are evolving. And all the descendants don't know about the history. I got that feeling too, because some knew it and others didn't, and didn't know each other.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want to comment on that, if if there's anything in what I said for you to comment on. That would be,
You know, I think in line with kind of what Kimiko was saying about, you know, and Judith about not being taught history
yes.
in school, I think, you know, because my family is Jamaican, obviously we don't learn Jamaican history in school because we're in America, even though it is, you know, connected to, you know, American history in many ways. You know, so I think also I felt like there's a lot of misinformation that's kind of normalized in the Jamaican community. And I think, you know, one of the issues that I wanted to write about was colorism, because at least for my mother's half of the family, you know, most everybody is like light skinned, you know, and I was kind of like the only dark one when I was growing up, you know, and I kind of normalized like that. I kind of internalized, you know, all the kind of messages I was getting when I was younger. And it wasn't until I was older that I kind of began to understand where it came from. You know, and I think that, you know, I think America kind of presents Jamaica as this kind of utopia, you know, the image that you get of it, you know, in America is very like colored through a lens of tourism and kind of consumption. So, you know, like Rastafarianism, which is, you know, a radical movement, but, you know, people only learn about Bob Marley and, you know, it's supposed to be something fun. And the like politics are kind of taken out of it. You know, so I kind of just didn't grow up knowing a lot about history. I think, you know, the motto, you know, you learn like the motto in Jamaica is like out of many, one people. And so I kind of grew up believing that we were all very unified. And so when I started writing this book, I started to read more about like the history of slavery, you know, the political movements in Jamaica, US intervention, you know, in the economy and things, you know, things like that. And it really, it changed my perception, but it also made a lot of things make sense, you know, a lot of the messages I was taught and like kind of the way, just the ways that my family kind of upheld white supremacy without really intending to, like made a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me, and I wanted to ask you about it, Maisy, is that as I thought about your book, I'm wondering if there's a protagonist.
You know, I think the character Abel Paisley is like the catalyst, but he's not, I didn't want him to be the protagonist.
Right.
You know, I think I wanted it to be about the family as a whole. And in a way, I think, you know, maybe like the protagonist is kind of like trauma. Because, you know, the way it's divided and separated, I kind of wanted to show how kind of trauma shape shifts throughout time and kind of like manifests, you know, has this ghostly kind of presence in everybody's life, no matter where they were born, what time they were born, they're still kind of feel it in some way.
Yeah, because I think it kept, well, shifting in a way.
Yeah.
Because people would tell their own stories, but then there'd be a third person, I guess, telling the story or telling some stories.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I like the device that Kimiko uses of talking to the child throughout. So, you know, it's the whole story really is told through Jane or Kiko. It's through her eyes, but she's telling the story to her child.
Right. Amazing. I love how you put that about the protagonist being trauma and shape-shifting. And I have to say, I love your book. I'm actually not quite done with it yet, but I'm just so engaged with all your characters. And I found myself like impressed and surprised that I wasn't craving more of that protagonist. So that really kind of all falls into place, thinking of that trauma as the protagonist. But yeah, the Akiko narrating her story to her child kind of came at the end. I found myself wanting to say you know, having her speak to somebody, but I wasn't quite sure who she was speaking to. And then when I kind of realized, oh yeah, that kind of helped kind of ground the story for me. a bit more.
Oh, so you didn't start out, Kimiko, knowing who the you was, although you started out with the you perspective. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Sorry, you'll see my dog is here on my lap. You see me moving, I'm petting my dog. Yeah, no, because, you know, this was such a long process. And I think when I write my next novel, I'm going to start in a much more structured way. I'm going to have a plot. This kind of just happened. I had my second child and I didn't have time to go to dance rehearsals anymore. So I kind of just started writing. So it was a big mess for quite a few years. And there was not even a you, it was just this story. And then then kind of the you, her speaking to somebody, emerged probably halfway through, and then maybe 3/4 through. Because at first I didn't even realize she was pregnant. I really do feel like this story kind of came at me, you know, I don't know if you know, through ghosts or energies, or somehow this story kind of felt like it was channeling through me. So yeah, the pregnancy happened, and then I realized finally at the end who she was talking to.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I also have questions about your process, because you, on the other hand, Maisy, you use a variety of perspectives. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I was always surprised when I came to a new section. It was a different perspective, and I thought, oh, it's changed, and why has it changed?
Yeah, I think my process is similar. It was similar to Kimiko's. Like, I didn't really start out knowing what I was gonna do, but I knew, you know, I had like separate stories that I wanted to write. But yeah, it kind of just formed over time. But yeah, I after a while I began to think of it as like a novel in stories. And I noticed that, you know, some of the titles that I really like, that is kind of a feature to shift protagonists. Like I really love Edwidge Danticat's novel, The Dew Breaker.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how it's structured. Homegoing, A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. And one thing I like about the form is that I see that it allows for kind of playing with genre, you know, and so going along with the idea that, you know, trauma is what kind of is central in all the characters' lives. I wanted, you know, I wanted to have different sections so I can show how it kind of like manifests. And, you know, the metaphor is the central metaphor is like ghosts or hauntings. So in most of the stories, there's some sort of supernatural, it manifests in a kind of supernatural way, like an exorcism or, you know, a literal haunting. But also, you know, I was just thinking about, you know, since I came here when I was young, when I was 5, I didn't really get to know, you know, most of my grandparents. I only know one grandfather really, or at the time I did. And so, you know, I would have to learn about these people by asking different people in my family. And I think, you know, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that, you know, everybody's perception of the person was different. And so I would have to piece together this idea of my grandmother from everybody's different skewed kind of perspectives and stories. And so I kind of wanted the novel to reflect that, you know, specifically in the kind of Vera character, who is kind of enigma, which I feel like my grandmother was. She's kind of an enigma because it's, I think, especially since, you know, like if it's such a kind of like patriarchal country and the expectations on women are very different. So I feel like my mother's version of my grandmother is so different. It's so different because she was the oldest girl and she had all this responsibility, and, you know, my grandmother was hard on her, whereas my youngest uncle has a totally different perspective. So I kind of just wanted to show how experiences can vary in a family, how trauma can vary in one family, you know, over time.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. And Kimiko, what I noticed, I mean, what I've noticed about in Maisy's book, the presence of white people are always present, even when they're not present. In your book, Kimiko, they have a very small role. Yeah.
Although in a way, like part of why I called it Block 17 was for me, those guards with the guns, the white United States government that kind of, did this racist act, as, in the name of national security, but it was not at all equal with how they treated the Germans and Italians, even though there were some Germans and Italians who were German and Italian nationals were imprisoned, but not nearly on the scale, of the West Coast sweep. And so to me, that presence is kind of always there, that the white kind of world of the guards with their rifles are kind of always haunting the novel for me.
Mhm.
And then the main character is half white, so she's got that kind of conflict going on with her very identity. Yeah, so I guess that's how I thought it was interesting, because when we were going to do the cover design of the book, and just a huge shout out to Blackstone, because everyone there is so great, and Catherine English, who designed the cover, is amazing. And she actually showed me a version of it, and I showed it to my mom, who's, in a way, this is her story, even though it's definitely fiction. But she was like, "Where are the rifles? I need to see the rifles on this cover." So I told Catherine, she said, "Oh, right away, we're gonna put those in." So for her too, I think her memory of that is very much, and that's kind of the haunting of being, under surveillance, is that you don't see the guards, but they're always there watching you.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you do see them sometimes, but not at the same level that they see you.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that you made your mother, or Jane's mother, I'll call her a cyber person. Yeah, because she's older, but she seemed to be more with it than Jane was, or into technology. So
Yeah.
that was a different treatment, I thought.
Yeah, right around the time I was writing a novel, I had a best friend who I could never get in touch with. She would be like, "Well, contact me through Facebook." And I was like, "Well, I'm not on Facebook." Or text me or whatever. And I was like, "Where is she? Has she been swallowed by, the internet?" And then somehow it felt fitting for the mother, in the way that she's kind of always running from her past, running from her trauma, that in a way the online would be like the perfect portal, through which she could finally escape. So I kind of used that to kind of symbolize for me that absence that was a result of her childhood trauma.
Yeah, and it probably symbolizes a lot of what we're going through now. I mean, over the last few months, we have become more, my profession is information technology. So I started with IBM years and years ago. I won't say how many years ago. So I still have my fingers in technology, but over the last 9-10 months, we've all been forced to, adapt to this world and live in it and use it. And, that's really become our main way of interacting with the rest of the world. Having said that, how has, you debuted in March, I think, and you're in June. So how has that affected your being able to, normally I guess you would go on book tours.
Yeah.
Limited or whatever, but you haven't been able to, correct? So we're using this medium.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you don't get the kind of feedback the kind of positive feedback you get from face-to-face contact. I feel like it's harder to read people on Zoom. Obviously you don't really hear applause or anything. But I think, it does make events a little more accessible for other people. So I feel like there are pluses and minuses. Obviously now it's normal to record and, play it later. And I think now people don't have to be kind of centered in metropolitan areas or like large cities to go to literary events, which is positive. So, and I've been able to do, you know, because my tour was supposed to be regional, the one that was canceled, but I've been able to go all over, you know, the country because of the virtual format, which is
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with everything. Yeah, you said, Maisy. I think I was very anti kind of social media, and I'm kind of more like the Shiro character than the Jane character with my kind of skepticism about how much we kind of put our lives into the hands of, you know, everyone who's kind of running these platforms. But I've kind of, yeah, had to succumb to it with everyone else. And I've been grateful, you know, grateful for Zoom, teaching my classes on Zoom, especially dance classes. I never would have agreed to do that. But it's certainly better than nothing. But I agree with Maisy that, you know, like this opportunity to be talking with you all today might not have happened, you know. So definitely some pluses and minuses.
Yeah, and of course, as you said, Maisy, there's, oh, you know, there's certainly the opportunity for this recording to go much more broadly than just the Westport Library, who would have been your audience had we had a normal audience.
Yeah, yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So I know you've alluded, Maisy, to ghosts, since ghosts are in the title. And I know, as you pointed out, each section deals somewhat with ghosts. A lot of the, you know, reading it, I learned more than I ever knew about Jamaican tradition or whatever. You know, I visited there, oh, so many years ago, but, you know, the normal place, Montego Bay. And that's it. I haven't been back to Jamaica since. So reading it, I learned a lot, just in, you know, the evolution of, as the characters evolved. So yeah, so I guess I was just asking you to comment a little bit more on the ghosts. So those really legends that exist? Because I'm thinking about the ending part, particularly with
Yes,
the three girls.
Yeah, like there's some aspects, I guess, of, sorry, my apartment is always so dark. I feel like you can't even see me. There are some aspects of the of like folklore, I think, that I grew up with. Just the idea of like duppies, which are, you know, the Jamaican word for ghosts, or like a malignant spirit. You know, and that was just very normalized when I grew up, like kind of talking about ghosts. I feel like my family would talk about ghosts more than they would talk about like our family history and, you know, real things that happened. You know, so it felt kind of natural to include that because it was such a big part of my childhood. But then there are other kind of legends and folkloric characters, I guess, that I learned about when I was researching for the novel. And so the for people who haven't read it, there are these like three girls. There's this figure in Jamaican folklore called the Ol Haig. I've never actually heard anybody say the name out loud, but I think it's pronounced Haig. And it's kind of like, she's kind of like this witch who can like, she's supposed to be an older woman in the community, and then, you know, at night she takes off her skin and she can fly or shapeshift into like an owl or a cat, and like squeeze through keyholes. And the legend is that she can suck your kind of breath out or your life force, or she can, I think in some cultures like Guyana, she actually sucks blood. So, you know, there are different, I guess Sukoyant is the name. It's like a different, I think each island kind of has like a slightly different version or name for the figure, but it's the same kind of legend no matter which island you go to. So I was kind of just fascinated with that character when I was reading about her. And so I found a way to kind of incorporate her into the novel.
Okay.
Yeah. And for you, Kimiko, the you know, those blue devils,
Yes.
they were
Lighter, blue something.
well, first of all, they were, at one point they were really scary. And I guess for me, part of their scariness was I didn't know, it became hard for me to distinguish between what Akiko was actually seeing and what was in her head. Because at first I believed her. And then I began to not believe her. And there was always this sort of space between, eventually what's real, what's not real. Almost like one of those Henry James novels, that was written from the point of view of the governess and the whole thing was a lie.
It's funny because a lot of people have talked about, Jane's or Akiko's mental health issues, and I can definitely see it from that perspective. But I was almost surprised at first because I started working with the legend, legend of Jizo or Jizo Bosatsu, or which is an old Japanese Buddhist part of Buddhist mythology. Is that Jizo is this god who assists people through transitions, including from life to the next realm. And there's this limbo land between life and the next realm that Jizo is kind of known to help people, especially babies or young spirits who died before their time, navigate those kind of scary in-between world where those Oni monsters, the blue, they're often actually blue and red, but I went with blue for various reasons in my novel. But these monsters kind of torment these baby spirits or young spirits unless Jizo is there to help them safely cross this mythical river. So I was really working with that legend. And for me, that legend, I didn't kind of, relegate it to below kind of truth. I kind of took it truthfully. So I was really kind of, and for me, the Jane's uncle, her mother's little brother who dies in camp, his spirit is kind of stuck in that limbo land, trying to cross. So I guess I played with that the reality of that Jizo legend along with Jane's reality and started to kind of interchange them. So while some people more like, oh, well, obviously she was crazy, for me, it was like, oh no, she was seeing the Oni that were right there, right there in her attic.
Yeah, because we're looking at inherited habits, I think, or traits that Jane shares with primarily her mother, I guess. So, yeah, and then I was drawing the parallel of what happened to Jane's uncle, baby uncle, at the camp. Reminded me a lot of what we've seen would happen with enslaved people. The choices for the children and whether you'd want to subject your child to that life, whatever that life is. And so, reading the two books, I was trying to draw whatever parallels I could, what commonalities. Obviously, they're family stories based on history. You could say they're family secrets. They're both exploring, like I said before, legend and tradition, and bringing it into the present and how it affects the character that's living in the present. But so really fascinating. I was fascinated by both of them. And Maisy, I'll admit that I shouldn't probably say this, but reading it, I just speed read the second time since it had been so long since I read the book. And I picked up so much more reading it through again. Family tree at the beginning helped. I really didn't see that the first time.
Yeah, I actually didn't have it in when I first wrote the book. My agent was the one who suggested I put it in, and everybody's been saying how helpful it is.
Yeah, because there's so many characters, and I was saying, oh, who is this? And how they related to so and so. But the family tree, as I said, helped, and as I said, I got much more out of it. The visit of Haile Selassie, for example, to Jamaica, which is a real thing. So it's an event that happened. So really, really neat.
Yeah, I mean, all that is stuff that I kind of absorbed or, found out while I was researching that
Yeah.
I was just so surprised that I'd never learned about any of that stuff. But also, yeah, I kind of wanted to jump off something Kimiko was saying too about, the folklore in her book. And I feel like that's also a parallel in our two novels, is that the Old High legend too is something that is traditionally associated with the death of children. And I that's the idea. And I think you're supposed to, I forgot, my mother told me there's some people sleep with put an inch ruler, like a ruler in a child's room to protect them, or an open Bible. There are a couple of things that people used to do to protect children. But yeah, I think I wanted to include folklore because I realized while I was reading those stories, just how folklore is kind of an outlet for people to process trauma in a way. These legends come from, I think, pain in the community, and it's kind of the stories that they make up to kind of explain it. That's kind of why I wanted to end there in my novel.
Yeah. And one of the things that I saw was that in your novel, Maisy, it's in a way it looks back to explain the present.
Yes.
Because we don't know what's going to happen to, and that's maybe not the point, what's going to happen to the existing characters like Abel, like Karen. In yours, Kimiko, it seems like the propulsion is towards the future. And it's sort of like when Jane or Akiko decides to go to her aunt in Los Angeles. The book ends, but she doesn't end.
Yeah. For me, I guess while I do think it's important to move forward, I think so often, as we were saying earlier, just now, the history books, until the history books are complete, we can't really move forward, right? We can't kind of base our future on lies, so we have to kind of acknowledge the other side of history that hasn't been told. So I think, in my book, the mother, because of her childhood trauma, really kind of took part in denying the future and only wanting to look forward. So she kind of disappears into the online, cyber world. But that, that momentum forward that I think our country is very obsessed with, we tend to, I think, not necessarily value our elders. We tend to always think the newest, technology is the best. I think in that rush to move forward, we do, we risk, building everything on a really rocky foundation. So for me, the novel in many ways was about, Jane becoming Akiko and realizing she has to come to terms with her past or look at it in order to have any chance of moving forward with, integrity.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that I think it was Kimiko's. Yeah. Kimiko, could you read that quote by William that starts your book, by Walter Benjamin?
Oh, yeah.
That image really struck me.
Yeah, Walter Benjamin, he was Jewish, and I think he wrote this at the beginning of the 20th century. Not sure exactly the year, but I had heard this quote a long time ago, and I kind of put it there because it felt like it really, kind of summed up what I was just talking about. So shall I read the quote?
Mm-hmm.
This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned toward the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe that keeps piling ruin upon ruin and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future, to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. This storm is what we call progress. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think that progress, is often what keeps us, inclined to accept, kind of swallow some lies and continue moving forward without, without regard for other aspects. I think I was in my novel kind of trying to show how even though we might on the surface not want to acknowledge the past, the trauma is still there, so it's going to manifest in much more insidious ways that we don't have control over when they're repressed to the unconscious level.
Yeah. And in a way, Shiro was doing that, right?
Yeah, Shiro is kind of my hero. It's kind of hard for me sometimes because I think a lot of people, when they read the novel, as you said, they believe Jane, who's the protagonist. And so they're always like, oh, he's so paranoid. He's so, he's a conspiracy theorist. And I'm like, no, that's me, I'm Shiro. Whereas from Jane's perspective, she always wants to shut him up because he's always trying to point out connections between then and now and kind of talk about the negative. And she's always wanting to cast him as a conspiracy theorist. But yeah, definitely, he's wanting to, I think, yeah, he's trying to shout out the truth more from my perspective.
Yeah. And at the same time, he's not looking at the past. That's his.
Yeah, right. I wanted to give him kind of a, some weakness. And his, I think you're right, is he doesn't necessarily believe in spirits or ghosts. So that's kind of his blind spot. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I'm just going to jump in because this sounds like I just need to start reading every book now. So thank you all. This has been a fabulous presentation of these two books. Kimiko, Maisy, congratulations on your debuts, and we look forward to reading much more from both of you. No pressure. No pressure. And Judith and Bernicestine, thank you so much for your insight and your thoughtfulness on asking these two authors about their books. It just reminds me also how rich this country's history is, and how much we need to learn from all of our experiences and all of our families, and all of that. So for those of you watching this, you can purchase Block 17 and These Ghosts Are Family through your favorite booksellers, or borrow them from the library. And for more information and other events and recordings and more books than you can think about, visit westportlibrary.org. Thank you.
I'd just like to say one more thing, Jennifer.
Absolutely.
Kimiko and Maisy have not heard applause because they do these Zoom meetings. So I think Bernicestine and I are going to clap for them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judith. And
Thumbs up. Two
it was
thumbs
a
up.
wonderful conversation. I'm so really honored to be part. And Maisy, as I said, I love your book and I can't wait to finish it. And Jennifer, thanks for bringing us all together.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. This has been wonderful.
Okay. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.